Hi. Sometimes when you want to perform certain operations like move, rotate, or scale, you want to have your gizmo, the XYZ, to be in a certain orientation other than the usual one, like view or parent or local, something like that. So to do that, starting from Max 2023, we have here in Tools something called Snap Working Pivot. I will click this bar here to keep it active in the viewport. So while the object is selected, now I have this move selected. Click Place Working Pivot. When you do that, when the mouse approaches a certain geometry, you will see that you have some snapping points. One in the center of the face, one in the center of the segment, one on the vertices. So I will click here in the face center, click and drag. Now I placed the origin. Now without releasing the mouse button, I will drag to choose where I want my X to be oriented. So I can choose, for example, this segment edge, and I release. Now I have this. Now my Z is in this direction, and my X in this direction. You can see immediately that when you do that, the reference coordinate system switches to working. If I go to rotate, it's view, because Max remembers the last coordinate system you used with a certain tool. So if I go back to move, it's working again. Now, if I go to rotate, I can choose working. Now, why? Okay, the orientation is correct, but because here this option here jumps to use pivot as a point center, which is the last one used with the rotate. So I can click here and choose the transform coordinates center. So the placement will go back to where I placed manually the working pivot. So you can see here this is the X. This is the X. And same thing for scale. Also switches to view, working again here. Now I can choose this option here, or I can also click once here, and without placing anything, just right click, and this will switch to use transform coordinate center. So now this is the X. I can scale on the X like this, or the Z. This of course applies to sub-object elements. I can choose this, let's say this face here. Also, if you right click, if you want to use a numerical value, also you can see here that it's using the working pivot. So the X, the Z, so they all follow the working pivot. Now let's say you want to change the orientation of the x-axis or the y-axis. You can click Align Working Pivot. So you have these handles here that you can click and drag. The one with yellow, you cannot move it, it's protected. So let's say I want to change the X orientation. I can click here and drag. Now it's here. Now I'm clicking again. If you want to have, let's say, the Y protected, you can double click it. Now you can manipulate this and this. A fast way to place a working pivot is to select a sub-object element like this here and click this option, Selection Pivot. Now what happens is that the Z axis will be perpendicular to this face. Here, if you don't care too much about the orientation of the X and Y, you can do this. So now we have this here. Of course, you can use it. You can use it for sub-object selection. Now, you can also select an edge and also use Selection Pivot, and you have this. You can choose a vertex and Selection Pivot. You can see here. You can reset the working pivot. Now, again, I will place a working pivot using this option here. You have this option here. It says Align Pivot to Working Pivot. The pivot we are talking about here is the local axis of this object. So if I click here, first before clicking, let's check the local axis. So the local axis is here. So right click. What happens here is that this changed. So anyway, keep an eye on this. If I click Align Pivot to Working Pivot, if I go to Affect Pivot Only, you can see that the local axis now is placed in the exact same place where the pivot point is and oriented in the same direction. So turn off this. If I change the working pivot, let's say I put it here. Now I'm using the working pivot, which is here, but let's say I decided to switch to local. You can see that the local now is here. Of course, I can click and reset it. Now, when you click Place Working Pivot, if you activate this option here, Place Pivot Bounding Box, you can see that you have like a additional point that you can snap to. Let's say I can click here, for example, and you have this. If I click again, I can choose this here. So if you don't want to see this bounding box every time you click, just turn it off. I will choose a working pivot here for now. to talk about a very important feature, which is this: create grid from working pivot. The grid we're talking about here is a construction plane. See, by default, your construction plane is this one here. So every time you click to create something, you're creating it on this infinite ground plane. So here I'm gonna click and I'm gonna say create grid from working pivot. Now, as you can see, a construction plane is created, and its origin is in the same origin as the working pivot, and its orientation is the same as the working pivot. So now when I create any object, you can see that it is created on this construction plane. Now, this is an object, so you can select it and delete it, and you can create more than one. If you want to activate the default construction plane, the home construction plane, you can right click and say activate home grid. So now you can click again this grid and say activate grid, and now again you are using this grid. Now, since it's an object, I can click it and move it, and now when I create an object, it's here. Now remember, this gizmo stays here because we are choosing use transform coordinate center. If I choose this option here, use pivot center point, it will jump to the object, or this option here, use selection center, but the orientation is still as the working pivot that we've chosen. Right click, activate home grid, and I can delete it if I want. One last thing, I will select place a working pivot. I will click and drag here, move, working. I can use this, for example, I will choose this polygon here. I can use it with the Smart Extrude. I can click shift and drag. No need for Boolean or something like that. I can click this and use this option here, selection pivot, or let's say this one here, selection pivot, shift, drag until the end, and we have this gap here, this hole. And of course, this is very useful when you're doing animation and rigging and stuff like that. So basically that's it for this tutorial. Hope you like it. If you do, please press the like button, subscribe to the channel, and see you in the next video. Thank you.